Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's Civil Discussion. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, May 1st. Also a great pleasure to be joined by Don Keelan, our co-host on the show. Don, good to see you again.
Andrew, great to be here.
All right. Well, boy, there's been a lot going on since our last show. And a lot of it, of course, centered around some of the activities in some of the college campuses. Columbia University down in New York is probably the prime example, but we're seeing student encampments up at UVM and Middlebury, right across the country, basically. University of Southern California, which has never been known as a hotbed of student unrest, had some issues with students protesting the U.S. policies in Gaza and towards the Palestinians. So that's basically the heart of the whole issue here, to the point where they canceled their commencement. And a number of other colleges, I guess, are considering the same thing. But there's been a variety of responses that some of the colleges have gone to. But, I guess for us, like, the core question is, how does this play into the whole free speech or hate speech thing that we've been talking about now for a couple of years? I mean, we've been talking about the importance of listening to the other side and kind of putting yourself in their shoes or taking their perspective. And it seems like that whole idea is being put to a very deep test by some of these students at the various college campuses who clearly feel very motivated around this, but it's like everything else, a lot of nuance going on here as well. And I guess I just wondered kind of what's been your reaction to some of these, campus upheavals. Some have been far worse than others, but do you think there are some lessons to be learned here, either by the students who are going through, setting up tents and closing down campuses and having commencement addresses postponed? Well, things that we can learn.
I must say it's not new. It's April, or it was, now we're 1st of May. It's the time of year where the kids come out of the dorms and they protest. What's new this year, it's the Gaza-Israeli war. But, you and I have seen it so often with the down with Wall Street not too many years ago, right? And then the really show our age. We can go back to the Vietnam era. We can go back to the civil rights era. We can go back to the gay rights era, apartheid,
80s and 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to be. It's not unexpected that kids or students will come out on campus at this time of year and protest. Notice rarely do they come out in January, and they'll go away by graduation. It'll be all they'll pull up their tents and they'll be all gone.
Well, that's certainly what college presidents are hoping, I'm sure.
Well, you're probably right. And the thing is, between now and then, what kind of chaos could happen, or hopefully will not happen. We just saw the other night now what's going on in Columbia has been ratcheted up to another level, and then I gather the president of the college called in the New York City Police yesterday or last night, and then they cleared out the students from the hall. To answer your other question, there's absolutely nothing wrong with protesting. We're for that, and we got some good guidance, I think, from Professor Dickinson last month when we had on the professor from Middlebury College, defining the difference between hate speech and free speech. And the line is somewhat difficult sometimes to define. But where I draw the line is when protesters are interfering with the rights of other people who may not agree, or maybe they agree with them, but maybe a lot don't agree with them. but not to interfere with their rights, such as the right to go to class, the right for free movement, the right to feel safe, right? The right not to have property damaged. Right? Go out and protest anything you want, but that's where I draw the line.
Yeah, well, I guess I feel kind of similar. You know, it's certainly within everyone's constitutional right to protest, as long as, like you say, you're not keeping somebody else from doing what they want to do, like in this case, go to class or move about a campus freely or whatever. And certainly, you know, the instances we've heard about where you know, students have been accused of anti-Semitism on very little evidence of that, or at least a conflating of you know, anti-Semitism with the actions of the Israeli government. I guess I find myself kind of thinking, you know, this is a complicated question, and you just can't simply say that just because the government of Israel did something you find abhorrent means that you know, and you criticize that, that means you're anti-Semitic.
Well, let me stop you there just for a moment. We were advised by Rabbi Cohen, Mike Cohen, back in September, just before, ironically, just before this whole Israeli-Gaza thing broke loose on October 7th. Rabbi Cohen said right here on this show that you have every right to criticize Israel, right? And then in the Israeli government, and you should keep on doing it if that's what you want to do, and if you got legitimate reasons to do so, because he does it as well.
Right.
But there's a difference between criticizing the Israeli government and their actions and so forth, and saying to a student, you need to go back to Poland.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely, of course.
Or you
no
need
question
to,
about that.
you know, we're gonna take you out, or you know, threatening, where that student now feels completely unsafe.
Right. No, there's no justification for that. I don't think. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you just it's two different things, and it just gets really complex on both sides. I mean, I read a really interesting article this morning in the New York Times by one of their opinion columnists, Bret Stephens, about a movie that Sheryl Sandberg, was formerly a very high executive at Facebook, has put out about basically about the Hamas attack on October 7th and how grisly that really was. I mean, maybe there was accurate accounts about that at the time, but you know, you can maybe forget after 6 months. But you know, some of the video footage that is in this movie is like beyond shocking, and you know, it almost makes you understand why the Israeli government responded the way it did. I also think that then they also in turn fell into a trap that Hamas set for them and went to an overreaction of it. But anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down in all of that, but it's just I guess I mentioned that just because I think it's just a complex situation that we're looking at here, and trying to find that boundary line between where free speech ends and hate speech begins can be kind of tricky. But you're right. I mean, I think the dividing line, and I think we remember hearing former Governor Jim Douglas talk about this at one of the Zoom calls we were on with Professor Matt Dickinson, where you know, when it's like sort of a call to some sort of violence, is where you go, wait a minute, okay, you're right to say X, Y, or Z ends at that point.
Well, and again, another thing I'd like to make sure is that it stays peaceful, if it can stay peaceful, and that the institutions don't have to call in outside forces, and specifically not to call in the National Guard.
Right. Right.
Now, you and I grew up at a time when the National Guard was called in.
Yep.
I believe it was in the early 70s in Ohio at Kent State. And the,
I remember that very well.
and the troopers were, or the soldiers, were not trained in riot control and crowd control and mob control. I mean, it takes special training.
Absolutely.
New York City is so well trained in this. Last night they had over 1,000 police ready to take over that building. They initially went into it with 50, but they had over 900 surrounding the building that nobody knew about. So they know how to handle that and so forth. So I hope the Guard, I hope things can stay calm. It would also be helpful, because it goes right to the heart of our show, the issues between the Palestinian, the pro-Palestinians, and the Israeli students. To have a discussion and meet on it. I mean, they may not walk away 100% in agreement, but at least they'll understand where the other side is coming from, and that's really what we try to do here on the show.
Yeah, I wondered if at any of these campuses there's been an attempt to have a dialogue like that, where you'd take some of the students from both sides and get them all in a room, and hey, okay, what are you mad about? And back and forth, and really try to listen to see what.
That is, excuse me, interrupt you. That is exactly what's being done at Dartmouth, and they're being used as an example throughout the country as a college that can do it without having tents put up and protesting. The students are engaging within the classrooms.
And I also thought another interesting instance was what went on at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, where apparently their university administrators and students met, talked about the demands the students had about schools divesting from Israeli companies or whatever, which I is another whole tricky area that I know can get very complicated quickly. But at least there was an attempt made by both sides to talk about what each wanted and set up a process that will run through from now until October, when both the students and university officials will be able to say, okay, we'll look at our investment portfolio to see if there's something here that can be changed. But at least there was a conversation that happened. And it makes me wonder why we can't see that happening in other places.
Well, it's happening now at UVM. It just came out a few minutes ago.
Right.
Where UVM will share their investments. They'll share what their investments are in with the protesters. But there's so much emotion here, and you were mentioning the program you saw, where someone did a video of what occurred on October 7th. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, and I haven't seen this, but to put this all in some perspective, Israel had lost 1,200 citizens on October 7th, out of a population of about 9 million. Right? That would be the equivalent of our 9/11, where we lost roughly 3,000 actual deaths. But the equivalent of the ratio of the 1,200 to Israel's 9 million would be the same as, if that happened, it would be 46,000 Americans lost,
right.
Given the size of our population.
Right.
And what did we do? Right? We went to war.
We invaded Iraq.
We destroyed, almost literally destroyed Afghanistan, right? Going after the Al Qaeda and the Taliban and Bin Laden. Spent over $1 trillion, and it was the longest war in American history, right? Because we lost 3,000, not to mention the thousands that have been affected since then.
Right. Yeah.
And then you can get really carried away and say at Pearl Harbor we lost 2,000 in a population of roughly 140 million. And look what we did. We got into World War II.
But you know that should have been almost an advisory for the Israelis. Not that I want to get too deep into how they responded, but they saw that the response that we made to 9/11. I mean, to me, I understand the going after Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. That made sense. What didn't make sense was then invading Iraq and then getting bogged down in a war there for almost 10 years and costing like I say trillions of dollars and tens of thousands of people dying. I mean, I guess I would have thought if I was the Israeli military, I would have said, okay, that didn't work out too well. We should try something different. And I don't know what that response would have been, but I do think that they got bogged down into a situation that I think was avoidable, where instead of the focus being on the horror show that happened on October 7th, the focus now is more about the 33,000 or 34,000 Palestinians, many of them women, children, innocent people, not Hamas soldiers, who've died.
Well, I agree with you. We got to be careful not to get into the military side of this and so forth.
It would be easy to do.
Well, and you're right. And I've told some folks that I have specifically stayed away from the military side because I don't know enough about it. I mean, and number one, I'm not an expert on that.
And we're not there.
When they're calling for a ceasefire, a ceasefire is a military term, in the sense that there's a war going on, and to have a ceasefire is quite relative in relationship to the military. Again, right where they are right now, would you want a ceasefire? I don't know. I don't know enough about the military affairs and the significance of it, what it would cost, and so forth. It'd be like asking Roosevelt on D-Day, should we have a ceasefire? Well, who knows? I mean, but the thing is, so you need to stay away. The thing that bothers me about this whole, the event on October 7th, and when Israel's reaction afterwards, and then what's going on in American campuses here today. Who's behind it? Right? It's so spontaneous that I got to believe that Iran knew all the way through what was going to happen, even to the point of the color of the tents that they should have at Middlebury College. I mean, that's maybe getting a little bit.
Maybe those were the only tents that they had at the local store or whatever they got them from.
I thought the flag, the color of the tents were the Israeli flag, but that's interesting.
The blue and white, right? Wasn't that the school colors?
No, the white and blue, yeah. Blue and white, you're right. But when you see where I'm coming from, and this is coming out now that there's agitators, there's professionals behind many of these campus engagements that have nothing to do with the students. And there's you can get $3,000 a month. I'm sorry, for 3 months, if you're willing to come out and protest and be part of this. And it's being funded by several organizations. How true this is, I don't know. I did hear it. The Rockefeller Brothers Foundation and the Soros Foundation could very well be part of this. I can't confirm that.
That's the first I've heard of that, although it wouldn't surprise me on one level. But on the other hand, I do think there is some genuine, homegrown, grassroots, anger that comes out about from students who are at some of these campuses. I think that there is some of it is just simply genuine and organic. I'm not saying I agree or don't agree. But I think that there's. Because it did take a while. I mean, it's not like this happened spontaneously right after, October 7th. This is now, 6 months later, 7 months later?
But the
college demonstrations that we're seeing.
Well, that's because it's April. They're not going to. Students aren't going to come out, Andrew, in New York City. They're going to put up a tent when it's 20 degrees outside.
Yeah, but they might go marching around the campus. I mean, I remember those.
There was protesting, but not to the encampments. I mean, That's just recent.
Well, yeah, but I'm assuming they're modeled after the tent encampments we're seeing in the southern end of Gaza, where all the populations have been shifted down to.
That's a stretch, I think.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I'm guessing. But anyway, just to kind of get back to I guess our central point here, I think it may well. I was thinking about this morning. It may well turn out to be sort of a teaching moment in a way. I'd like to think that out of this, despite all the disruption we're seeing at the moment, there might come some kind of sense from by some of the students who are involved in this that okay, maybe free speech isn't completely absolute. That I may have concerns about X, Y, or Z, but there is a point where that tips over into something beyond free and fair speech, into something that's more hateful and dangerous and opens the door to a violent situation, or limits somebody else's free speech. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if that's the takeaway that comes out of this in the long run.
I'm not sure I follow you on that.
No, I just think about how the experience of them all protesting, demonstrating, and seeing what happens. I just wondered if some of them will be thinking about the grand context of it all.
Well, I think, again, sometimes it's helpful to put things in perspective. I think it's just under 5,000 colleges in America. Last week there were 91 colleges protesting. Right? There's maybe 10,000 students when you add them all up, all the campuses, and that's exaggerating probably that there are 10,000 in the tents. There's over 2 million students. Right? So there are a lot of places that this is not happening at all. And would we be talking about it today if it wasn't for the fact that everyone's covering it? It's news, right?
Oh yeah, it definitely
So
is news.
because my point is another point I want to make is where has everyone been? The Palestinian people have been oppressed for years, all the way back to 1916 when the Balfour Declaration gave the property, the Jordan to Israel, to create the Jewish state. Right? There's been issues, in dealing with them ever since, and maybe that's what would be very helpful. I think is to have if you can get people together, to sit down and go over the history of all this. And I think there'd be a lot more sympathy for the Palestinians than there is right now as a people. On the other hand, what's happened is terrorist groups, Hezbollah, Hamas, have taken over, to some degree the PLA, have taken over the governance of this, 2 or 3, I think it's 2.5 million people who refer to themselves as Palestinians. What's also disturbing and very upsetting, why aren't the Arab countries helping out here? I mean, Egypt could open up the gates tomorrow and relieve so much of the suffering. And again, here's another issue for discussion. Why aren't the Arab countries helping out here more? And that's a whole other story. But, I think you hit on a point earlier. If we could get together and get the groups together and have a discussion, rather than closing down things. So.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to talk about just right there. I mean, it is interesting to me that the Egyptians have not made it easy for the Gazan folks to get out of Gaza if that's what they wanted to do. But behind the scenes, I think the Egyptians, the Qataris, and the Saudis have all been trying to work out a negotiated settlement with the Israelis and the Hamas leadership. and apparently they're getting very close to one, as we're talking here today on the 1st of May. But they haven't crossed the finish line on that yet at this point. But there has been a lot of work behind the scenes. I mean, the other thing that I think is very intriguing is the possibility that at long last, and this kind of gets to your point about why have the Palestinians sort of had to struggle for so long, is that the Saudis are apparently very close to brokering a deal to establish, fuller relations with Israel, both diplomatic and economic, that would kind of really begin to unlock the whole problem that has happened in the Middle East for so long, for what, 70, 80, well, going back to 1947 or whatever, and building on the Abraham Accords that were started there under the Trump administration, and that, that is almost, right there. And but the Israeli government has to back off a little bit to make that door open completely, which would finally, I think, lead us on a path towards really making a fundamental difference in the whole Middle Eastern situation. That would, I mean, you have other elements, obviously. You'd have to create either a two-state solution where there would be a separate Palestinian country, or maybe it's a one-state solution. Maybe Israel and the West Bank becomes one country, and it's a secular democratic country. That would be an interesting experiment to see how that would work out. But it's frustrating to me to read that, they're really, it's like literally right on the doorstep. If the government
It was on the doorstep.
could just open its eyes to say, look, that's the long-term thing, because what they're doing right now in Gaza, you have to ask yourself, well, what's the morning after look like?
Well,
Are they going to leave Gaza are they going to run Gaza and spend a lot of money and manpower doing that? Or are they just going to say, okay, back over to you guys, and Hamas comes back, or some other successor group?
When we lose sight of the fact that just a few years ago, over 600,000 people were killed in Syria, right next door.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, President Obama drew the red line, or drew a line in the sand, that no more. And that was, and then he wasn't
unfortunately,
really,
that red line didn't.
that's right. That's right. And but it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Who's behind this? And unless we confront Iran, there's no way in the world Hamas, Hezbollah, the Hutus can carry out what they're carrying out without the backing of a country that has the financial support and the technology to give them what they have. Right? Iran does not want a peaceful Israeli settlement with the other Arab states, the other Muslim states. Excuse me. They keep in mind you got a major issue over there. I don't know what's going to solve it, and that is the Sunnis and the Shiites. Saudi Arabia is a Sunni country. It's one of the largest in the world. The other countries that you were mentioning earlier are Sunni countries. Iran does not want that. Mm-hmm. All right? No way in the world do they want that. That's why they were backing Hamas. That's why they were backing Hezbollah. You're right. We were on the doorstep of Israel, making peace with the Emirates, with Saudi Arabia, I think Oman, and just like they had done with Egypt, with Jordan, and was it Dubai or Qatar or one of the other countries over there, and it was coming together. But Iran saw this, and they said, no way. Mm. And that's why I think what's missing from this whole equation, and I wish the Biden administration would really dig into it, how much of all of this is being driven by Iran. Now, you saw how we nearly went to war. I mean, Israel nearly went to war. That got scaled back a few weeks ago with all the missiles.
That was a scary moment.
It was. Right? But But I think getting back to the demonstrations, I think they should continue on if they have to, if that's what they want, but be peaceful. Do not interfere with the rights of other people, and the moment you do, that's the moment they should be stopped. All right, but it will be the calendar will stop it come the end of May.
Right, right, which is probably a good timeout for everybody. So speaking of timeouts, Don, we are nearing our timeout.
Oh, so we can't talk about the
But
taxes.
I know I know you wanted to talk about the shift gears drastically. Talk about the proposed wealth tax, I guess is the acronym. It's anyway, great talking to you again, Don. Good to have you here, and we'll have to well now we have to be back in a couple of weeks to talk about the wealth
We'll
tax.
see where the campuses are.
Yeah, we might have a chance to do a little update on that too, because it won't be summer yet by the time
No,
we come
it
back.
won't be.
All right. Well, that'll be it for today. Thank you all for being with us. We'll see you again the next time. Take care.